So before we talk about the Nailsmith and the lore he offers to Hallownest, I want to talk about this tool that I've been using to chat with people, artists, and other creators involved in the Hollow Knight community, which is an app called Amino. Now, I've never done a sponsorship on this channel before, and I think everyone knows that, but I've partnered up with Amino because this is an app that I genuinely believe people would actually like using. On top of Amino being completely free, it's also probably the only mobile network right now with this much of a diversity in community topics and interests. I've poked around other Aminos like Dark Souls, Overwatch, and even games like Doki Doki Literature Club, but the one I've been spending the most amount of time in is probably the Hollow Knight Amino. Once you join the Amino, you got full privilege to browse a curated feed of content, awesome fan art, funny posts, memes, whole 9 yards, and you can also trade Hollow Knight theories with other members like me using text, voice, and even something called avatar chat, which I think is pretty cool. The more you chat around and socialize, the more you can level up your Hollow Knight reputation, which in a strange way is actually kind of addicting. I haven't responded to comments as much as I want to lately, so if you ever feel like asking me a question about like a video or anything, sending me a message on here is probably the easiest way to get my attention. Alright, so yeah, let's get started. To know the full story of Hallownest, you must also know the story of its previous inhabitants, the life that populated the veins of the underground kingdom before it met its demise to the infection. And though most of those opportunities are lost, there still remains a friendly face every now and then as you travel through the tunnels. It's through these creatures how we gradually piece together the fragments of history that tell us quite a lot about the civilization. One such creature exists in the peripherals of the city. In the breadth of Hallownest Kingdom rings out a single hammer, owned by a lone nailsmith, infatuated with his work of crafting weaponry and a perfectionist to a fault, even after the kingdom's downfall. This nailsmith believes that there's no time to be wasted on anything that doesn't epitomize perfection, everything from an imperfect blade to the imperfect creatures that wield them, infested beings. Once citizens of Hallownest wander in and out of his territory, picking up whatever blade they can find in the refuse. The nailsmith's search to forge a flawless nail gave way to many attempts, failures, and a dwindling sense of fulfillment for the old bug. The smith feels he's amounted to complete nothingness, and this sense of confidence soon turns to apathy and neglect. But his neglect doesn't go without consequence. For every rusty, jagged nail he tosses into his failed pile is another weapon acquired by one of Hallownest's creatures possessed. But in your broken nail does he see the greatest potential. Upon being greeted by the knight, his full attention is suddenly brought to your weapon. It seems broken beyond any function, yet the smith retains faith in your weapon. It's strange how, through his years of disappointment that came from flaw after flaw, he finds a sort of spiritual second wind in your character, and decides that he would attempt one last time his lifelong dream of forging the perfect blade. So, an old nailsmith with his passion reignited, eventually finds his way to the flawless nail. The power seething through its blade is palpable, and its artistry only makes it that much more of a masterpiece. And so, with the nailsmith's mission drawing to a close, he decides that so must his life be brought to a miraculous end. A bug who must have spent at least decades of his own life yearning after this moment steps outside and realizes his dream was met, depriving him of any other purpose or calling in life. He asks your knight kindly, and then ecstatically, to be destroyed by the same exquisite nail he crafted, starving for the blade's flawless edge and to be put to his final rest. Here you have a choice to make. Either honor his request as keeper of the blade, or decide to spare him. If you choose to spare the old nailsmith, he leaves his hut and never returns. The nailsmith, exhausted and deprived of his request, plunges into the depths of the green path outside of the gardens of the kingdom's queen. And it is here where the reclusive Nailmaster Sheo finds the old bug, decrepit and broken down, and decides to invite him into his hut near the western gardens. Nailmaster Sheo is a retired knight that teaches us a lot of things both in and out of Hallownest. He gives you the great slash nail art, but he also offers a pretty scintillating dialogue on the similarities of wielding a sword versus merely creating strokes on a canvas. This realization was what ultimately led Sheo to finally put down his nail as well as his will to fight. Sheo took to the garden, where he discovered a love for fine arts. And perhaps growing weary of the weight of a nail was exactly what Sheo needed to be able to extend his artful wisdom over to a pupil of his very own, the Nailsmith. Not a pupil by means of violence or mastery of a blade, but of a more artistic pastime that was meant to ease one's soul. Sheo was a knight of uncontested skill and strength, even surpassing that of his brothers. But in due time, and as the kingdom fell to inevitable rot, the responsibility of a weapon was too overbearing, even for the Nailmasters. His brothers, Mato and Oro, still train intensely under the nail arts taught to them by the Nail Sage, but only at the expense of their inner peace. And just as Sheo himself learned, there are questions that can't really be answered with a nail, a lesson that Sheo would soon reiterate to the Nailsmith. In Hollow Knight, there's lots of talk about loneliness. The aftershock of the infection has left the kingdom dilapidated, and the few level-minded creatures left in the kingdom's dregs have been ensnared by this deep, overcasting depression. It's usually only one single pastime through which they can retain their will to keep going. With Lem, it's the collection of artifacts, just like the Nailmaster with combat, and like the Nailsmith with honing and mastering his own craft. It isn't until he meets Sheo and discovers the meditative properties of art and painting where his will to live becomes invigorated yet again. The Nailmaster had always been able to find his peace through crafting and tools, so as to further distance himself from the looming air of loneliness. So it's really not to any surprise that he was able to transition into sculpting and painting pretty easily. The Nailsmith soon realized he was one of these bugs that had allowed the weight of a blade to infest into his mind, and the burden of the nail became more overbearing than any seclusion he could have experienced, making him a slave to his own artisanship. Emboldened by his new calling, the Nailsmith shows a compassion, especially for Sheo, that he did not have earlier on in the quest. His dismissive attitude toward the bugs coming and going, making off with the spoils of his efforts, has turned into an attitude that shows much more concern. After an age of toiling alone in the outskirts of the city, he suddenly seems brightened up by the fact that Hallownest is more than just weapons and metal. And it was through Sheo's mentorship, the Nailsmith begins to see the parallels drawn between wielding a nail, participating in violence, and wielding a tool like a brush or a chisel that participates in something more passive, albeit more fulfilling. I guess that's why the achievement is named the Happy Couple, because these two characters have more in common than what's on the surface. The Nailsmith's honing of blades was a red herring to sate the reality of his own seclusion and loneliness. And it was that same loneliness Sheo suffered through that eventually brought him to the enlightening conclusion of laying down his nail for good. His brothers, Mato and Oro, both sworn students of the blade, subordinated and controlled by their own desire to fight and punish. The difference is, Nailmaster Sheo eventually left them behind by his own volition, in search of a pastime that was more productive. Because of this, Sheo decided that it was loneliness and seclusion that he really needed, and as he partook in more fruitful hobbies, it was this seclusion that he began to embrace. Sheo may have played his mentorship in helping the Nailsmith discover a different pastime, but through the time spent together, Sheo also taught him how to embrace his own loneliness. The ages of loneliness he spent toiling around in his forge, hammering away at metals that would only ever see use for killing. For it was Sheo that showed him being in seclusion may not be so bad. After all, what better friend to have in such a decaying kingdom than yourself? The Superforge thanks you for your attention, and seriously, check out that app I told you about earlier. It's honestly super fun. Please consider subscribing if you're new to the channel, and give the bell a ring so you never miss a lore episode again. Thanks guys, see you next time.